I'm Emma Basir. I'm the manager of civic engagement at SAGE, the nation's largest and oldest organization advocating for the rights and dignity of LGBTQ plus older adults. I use they, them pronouns, and I'll be the moderator for you today. This is part one in a series of voter engagement webinars that SAGE is hosting with generous support from AARP. If you're interested in getting involved in our work and learning a little bit more about how you can be an advocate for LGBTQ plus elders, you can visit our website at www.sageusa.org or reach out to advocacy@sageusa.org. And I'll put, all of our contact information in the chat. We're always looking for new ways to partner with folks on the ground. So please don't be afraid to reach out. So like I said, starting with a few housekeeping things, if you'd like to enable closed captioning for this event, please go to the bottom of your screen. You'll see kind of a little 3 dots that say more. Click on that menu, click captions, and then click show captions. You can also, if you want to get rid of them, you can get rid of the captions if you find them distracting. You can also if you click captions again, you can see the view full transcripts. You can go back and see what people have talked about in the past in case you've missed anything, you missed what someone said and you want to catch up. I'd like to remind our speakers today, as well as myself, to please speak slowly so that the captions can be as accurate as possible. I know I tend to talk a little bit too fast, so I have to always remind myself throughout. You can also change the size and style of your caption by clicking caption settings in the very same menu, where a new window will open up and you can make the captions smaller or larger. Just a note again that this event will be recorded for those who are unable to make it. I know we had a few folks who are unable to make it, and it'll be posted on our YouTube page as well as on our social channels. So we want to make sure that this information is really available to all of those who need it. We'll have time at the end for questions and answers, so please feel free to ask your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat function over to the side. If you'd like to receive updates from SAGE, you can click the link in the chat that I'm about to drop. And this is our, let's make sure everybody gets it. Definitely encourage our panelists to also share how you can sign up for your email alerts too, as well, if you'd like to. And just wanted to get started. So I'll start by introducing our amazing panelists. And then kind of as I introduce you, I'll pass it over to you, kind of want to hear a little bit more about your work and how your organization is working, just super briefly about how to help folks prepare for the 2022 midterms. So we'll start with Jeanne. So since 2009, Jeanne has spent most of her career serving as a leader in political nonprofits at Equality Arizona. She advocates for LGBTQ rights at the state capitol and directs the organization's electoral strategy and produces their media and communications.
I'm sorry, can you, my audio wasn't great, so thanks for introducing me. Yeah. Can you remind me what you wanted me to start out with?
Yeah, of course. Sorry about that. So yeah, if you want to just start out telling us a little bit about Equality Arizona's electoral work, what you've been doing to educate voters ahead of November 8th.
So alongside a lot of voter registration work, we have also prepared a really comprehensive voter guide that's at equalityarizona.org/vote. And I can put that link in the chat once I am not talking. But every election season, we like to prepare a voter guide like this that covers a lot of the things. I think it normally takes a lot of research to figure out otherwise, whether that's judicial recommendations or ballot measures. And so we have all of that information, and we have explanations of what some of the different offices exist for, what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, because I think that's really helpful when you're choosing who you want to fill that role. For example, I think the state treasurer is something that's, I think, just kind of a little obscure sometimes. And so we have those explanations in there.
Yeah, thank you, Jeanne. So next we have Brendon Blake from AARP Arizona. Brendon's the Associate State Director of Advocacy at AARP Arizona and has been there in multiple capacities since 2016. He focuses on advocacy work at the local, state, and federal levels, working on a variety of issues such as long-term care, housing, transportation, financial security, utilities. Previously, Brendon has worked in the areas of public housing and mental health. He has a passion to help people in whatever capacity he can. Brendon was born and raised in Phoenix, only leaving to complete his 4-year degree in psychology at Concordia University in Irvine, California. He returned to his native Phoenix to pursue his master's degree in both social work and public administration from Arizona State University, and used some of the social work skills in previously volunteering for the Alzheimer's Association as a caregiver support group facilitator. He's married to his wife, Lauren, who's a neuropsychologist who specializes in neurodegenerative conditions. And yeah, Brandon, could you tell us a little bit about what AARP and AARP Arizona is kind of working on this election cycle?
Yeah, thank you again for having me, Emma. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll say that we've sort of split up our voter education work into 2 camps. We've done a lot of the sort of who or how, when, and where to vote, trying to clear up any confusion that folks may have as it relates to any of the updates or changes to voting in Arizona. So we spent a lot of time, especially in the primaries, doing that. And with the general elections coming up, we've sort of shifted our tactics to doing candidate-related questionnaires and things like that. So we just recently published a Q&A with both the Senate candidates, Blake Masters and Mark Kelly. And we have actually just this past week finished wrapping up all of the filming that we were doing for our video voter guide series, which we've already published the video voter guides for the Arizona gubernatorial race, where we have both candidates who came in and filmed and answered a few questions from us. And we're also publishing, hopefully next week, we'll be able to publish both the treasurer, as you mentioned, Jeanne, the treasurer's race being a little bit obscure, as well as the attorney general race. We're going to post that as well. I'm going to post a link in the chat to sort of where you can find all the information that includes some of that earlier stuff about how, when, and where to vote, and then also some of the gubernatorial video voter guides and other stuff that we've done as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Brendon. So lastly, we have Darrell Hill of the ACLU of Arizona. Darrell's the policy director of ACLU of Arizona, and Darrell's work includes legislative advocacy in the areas of abortion, voting rights, LGBTQ rights, criminal justice reform, and education equity. Before Darrell became policy director, he was an ACLU of Arizona staff attorney, where he successfully litigated cases concerning voting rights, LGBTQ rights, and the First Amendment. So thanks so much for joining us. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about kind of what ACLU is focusing on this year.
Sure. Thank you, Emma, for having me, and thank you, everyone, for being here. The ACLU of Arizona is a nonpartisan, nonpartisan organization. We don't support or oppose candidates, but we are involved in 2 important races. We are doing voter education and voter information around the Arizona Secretary of State's race. Letting those voters know about the 2 candidates in that race and their positions on things like democracy and voting rights and things that will really impact our ability to access our democracy. We're also engaged in some voter education around the Maricopa Attorney's Office race, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office race. The MCO, that position is, Maricopa County is the 4th biggest county in the nation. It one of the bigger, has a large effect on how our criminal legal system in Arizona is run. So we are doing some voter information around that. Also, we're doing some voter education around the ballot proposition.
Looks like we lost Darrell right in the middle when he was talking about his ballot proposition. We'll pause to see if he's going to rejoin. I want to make sure we don't move on too soon. Okay. Well, we can come back to Darrell. Darrell, thank you, Jeanne. So, okay. Seems like we'll come back to it. So to really ground us in this conversation, Brendon, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how voter suppression has been affecting older adults in particular, and what AARP is kind of focusing their efforts around it, particularly given that voter suppression uniquely and, particularly affects communities of color. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, happy to. Always an instance of forgetting to turn myself back on mute or off of mute. Sure. So AARP's focus, in every election, sort of similar to the ACLU, we're nonpartisan and don't support candidates. And so all of our voter education work, whether it be with candidates or just general outreach to the community, always is nonpartisan, and we don't support candidates financially or otherwise. So it makes our outreach really easy because we have to keep our tactics even. And when it comes to just simple voter education about changes to the law, I'd say that probably the biggest thing that we've seen has just been a lot of confusion for people. And when voters are confused, it tends to drive down voter turnout. And AARP certainly supports, if you have the right to vote and the ability to vote, that you should be able to cast your vote. And so, like I already mentioned a little bit, a lot of our efforts have been focused around making sure that people have access to the knowledge about when, where, and how to vote, that in Arizona, you don't need to have a reason to vote by mail like we do in a lot of other states, and that there are choices when it comes to the candidates and making sure that we've given the people the information about where candidates stand on issues that are important to them. So we've done things like teletown halls with Arizona Clean Elections, for instance, as well as we recently did a virtual town hall that did outreach to the African-American community here in Arizona. We also did a pretty robust outreach campaign on voter education on the where, when, and how to vote to the Hispanic community here in Arizona. And we did some additional in-language work with the Navajo Nation.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, could you tell us kind of what you've seen, the issues that older adults are kind of facing as they go to vote? Something that always comes to mind for me is having safe transportation. I know a lot of our trans participants in particular don't feel safe using public transportation, which compounds their social isolation. But also, if you think about it, if you live at a place like a lot of, historically Black communities where you don't have a whole lot of polling, you don't have a polling location near you, and you don't have your baby unable to drive, and you can't use public transportation. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of the issues that you're facing, that you've seen older adults have been facing?
Yeah, and we've heard that, for years now. And one of the things when it comes to advocating at the legislature regarding some of these pieces of legislation is that we always want to be mindful to make sure that legislators know about potential unintended consequences, that if somebody needs help getting to a polling location or having their ballot mailed for them or whatever the case may be, that they still have that ability to. When it comes to voting, at least here in Maricopa County, we're fortunate that we have, vote centers that you can bring your ballot to your early ballot to any location, drop box or early voting place. In addition to voting on election day, you can go to any polling place, which makes it a lot more accessible. But, I wish that there were more resources that were available, and is certainly something that when we talk about making sure that everyone has the ability to vote, because we certainly know that everybody has the right to vote, but those can be two separate things. So we're hoping to figure out a way to get access to more people.
Yeah, thank you. So unfortunately, we're still waiting on Darrell to come back. Oh wait, now he's coming back. But I will go to Jeanne so that Darrell can get settled again. I won't put you on the spot immediately right as you rejoin. So we'll go to Jeanne first. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your work around trans voter protection in past years and this year, and what are kind of the issues that you've noticed have been coming up most for our community, and how you've been trying to address them.
Well, a lot of the problems that arise for trans voters are problems that affect trans people in a lot of the areas of our lives. I think you already mentioned some of the things around IDs, but beyond just the legal basics of how to get your documents updated, there's a lot of things that can cause problems for trans people as a consequence of that, whether that's automatic identity verification systems that fail, or just the fact that people might not really accept what they see on your valid ID. That could be because of your photo, maybe your appearance has changed since the time you've updated it, or it could be because they just ignore things and they just are discriminatory on that standpoint. So when people are asked to present some kind of ID, that can become a problem for trans voters. That's one of the biggest things we see, but there definitely are other factors. I just think that that's a lot of work. We were running a project called the Trans Voter Protection Hotline, which was a national program we did in partnership with the Equality Federation. That was a program where trans voters could call in and say, hey, this is a problem I'm facing at the polls. I'm having trouble figuring this out. Or, what do I need to take with me? What are the kinds of ID I need to have? Because that can help them to make decisions about, well, which are the forms of ID that I have updated and will allow me to vote. So we ran that program then. I think it might be continuing through Equality Federation this year, but I don't have that concrete information right now. But it was definitely something where we saw a lot of the kinds of problems trans voters were facing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I think to that end too, Darrell, if there's kind of anything that you'd like to share about, given what Jeanne just shared about kind of what people should know when going to the polls, what do LGBTQ older folks kind of need to know in general as they're heading to the polls? Driver's license not matching, what ID is, necessary. Oh no, we lost Darrell again. Right in the middle of a question. I can pass it back to our other panelists to see if you have anything. Just want to make sure that folks are kind of aware of like, okay, what exactly ID do I need? The voter registration deadline is on Monday in Arizona, so there's still time to register. Just want to make sure that folks kind of have all the information they need when heading to the polls. Darrell, do we have you?
Yeah, I'm back.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. But yeah, I was just asking kind of to what Jeanne was sharing, what LGBTQ folks should know when going to the polls. We see a lot of issues with voter ID laws. What are the actual what are the laws that we need to be aware of when heading to the polls? What rights do we have and all of that?
Sure. So the first thing any person should do when they're heading to the polls is to check that their voter registration status is up to date. So you want to go to azcleanelections.gov, and you can use that to check to make sure your voter registration is up to date. And you're really checking to make sure your name and your address match the what they have in a voter file matches what you have as your ID. Making sure that your address and your name are up to date. If they are, you are all set to go, and you should have no problems going to the polls. If they're not, there's a couple things you could do. You can always request a mail-in ballot. Mail-in ballots are available and can be upon request by October 28th. If you would still prefer to vote in person, you need to bring Arizona is a voter ID state, so you need to bring your valid voter ID to the polling location with you. If for whatever you do not have a ID that matches your name and address, you can bring other forms of identification. So generally, the first thing you're going to bring is an Arizona driver's license or an Arizona non-operating ID or a tribal identification card. If those IDs don't have your name and your current address that matches what's in the voter registration rolls, you can still vote by bringing other forms of identification. So number 2 on that list is you can bring 2 forms of ID that do not have a picture, but contain your current name and your current address. So a utility bill, a renter's agreement, a bank statement. 2 of those should suffice to allow you to vote. If you do have a ID, but it does not contain a current address, you could bring a copy of your ID and one of those bank statements utility bills, so on and so forth. If for some reason you present a valid ID and for whatever reason the poll worker refuses to give you a ballot, you can always request a provisional ballot. In that case, so if you're in a situation where the poll worker refuses to give you a ballot, the first step you should do is request to speak to a on-site election worker, someone who's a supervisor who can help you resolve that issue. They are supposed to be trained to understand that people's IDs changed, their appearances changed, but no matter as long as your name and your address match what's in the voter rolls, you should be allowed to vote. If you still have issues, you can always request a provisional ballot. When you do get a provisional ballot, it's important that you request to know what else steps you need to take to make sure your ballot is counted. Not all the time provisional ballots will be counted. You generally will have to take a few extra steps to make sure your ballot is counted. Lastly, no, gender discrepancies on your ID are not a valid reason to deny you a ballot or a chance to vote. So if your gender marker on your ID says one thing and you are presenting in a different gender, they are not allowed to refuse you the opportunity to vote. In addition, as Jeanne mentioned, people's appearances change. Our IDs in Arizona are valid till the age we're 65. My ID has a picture of me when I'm 19 years old. I do not look like I did when I was 19. So it's important, even if your picture changes, even if you're expressing a different kind of view or identity than the one that's on your picture, you're still to be allowed to vote if your name and address match what's in the voter rolls. So if you are denied the ability to vote, please request a provisional ballot. And also, you can call a number 866-our-vote. There are, on election day, there will be fully staffed with the lawyers to advise you what you need to do if your vote is not counted or if you are forced to cast a provisional ballot. So please keep that number in mind if you have any troubles on election day.
Yeah, thank you for all of that really important information. It's always hard to keep track of kind of all of the laws that we need to know about, and then you hear them parroted back to you and you're like, oh wait, actually this is not difficult. It's easy to, I can get a provisional ballot. We want to make sure that it's as easy as possible. We have the host of lawyers that you were talking about on 8666. It's 866-our-vote. Yeah.
Yes.
So
and
yeah.
One of the bigger barriers at the polls that people may encounter is just common discrimination that is unfortunately common in the lives of many LGBTQ people. There are specific trainings that poll workers should go through that make them understand that, whatever their political views or social views, they should not be applying those at the polls. But like we said, if you do encounter a problem, please call that hotline.
Yeah, I want to give some space. Brendon, Jeanne, if you have kind of anything to add about things that folks should know when heading to the polls. I feel like Darrell shared kind of a whole host of things, but just in case you want to add anything specifically before we move on.
I just want to thank him for mentioning the provisional ballot piece of that. So that way you can definitely cast a ballot day of the election. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of people don't know about provisional ballots, and we spend a lot of time reminding people about them. So yeah, I want to kind of pose this question to all of you, but we can kind of get started with Brendon maybe. But I'm sure that there are folks who are watching that are younger and kind of wondering what they can do to support older folks when heading to the polls, how they can, how they can help after all of the kind of difficulties that we talked about. We want to make sure that voting is as easy as possible to make it more likely that people are going to actually head to the polls. So how can we help, ordinary folks get to the polls?
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about at AARP is we always enjoy trying to get intergenerational conversations happening as it relates to voting. some of our grandparents have experience with, difficulty in voting and expressing their right to vote. We did a series in Arizona a couple of election cycles ago, and we've done it in other states as well, where we have, a pair, whether they be volunteers, as usually is who we were able to utilize, talking with their grandkids about the importance of voting and what it meant and what it means for their history. And so it was something that we really enjoyed doing, and then we've had a lot of success across the states and state offices and in engaging younger voters. We just know that they don't vote at the same rates that older folks do. So that's been one way we've been trying to engage younger voters as well.
Jeanne or Darrell, do you want to share anything kind of about some intergenerational opportunities? What are some things that, older people can do to encourage younger people to get out and vote, talking about their stories, voting, talking about how, what we've done to get the right to vote, and then, vice versa, how younger folks can help people get to the polls and kind of address kind of all of the issues that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk to young people about why you're voting, why it's important to cast a ballot, particularly for LGBTQ persons, old and young. Our rights are on the line, and people, the choices the politicians are going to make are going to have a profound impact on the lives that people live, the ability to live freely and to choose to kind of live in a manner that is best fits you. So I think when it comes to getting young people to vote, I think there's a kind of misconception that young people have that their vote doesn't matter, or that no matter what happens, the policies will kind of come out the same. But I think there's a critical that older folks tell younger people why they're voting and why their vote is important to them, and hopefully that can inspire younger people to go to the polls.
Yeah, I would really just echo that idea of, so I do a storytelling project with LGBT people who live in Arizona, and I've talked to people who are pretty young and people who are older, and those generational moments of solidarity do come up quite a bit, because I think, for a lot of people, when they're coming out, they don't have access to other people in the community, and they don't have the appreciation necessarily of what other people have gone through and how things have been for other people. And having those moments to really connect to people who have come before you is something that can really give you a better appreciation of how we fit into society together. And as far as I see it, that's what voting is all about. It's about how we're going to form relationships as a society. So things like that, just sharing your story with younger people and helping to bring them into a larger community, is something that I think can really motivate people to vote.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that you mentioned the importance of personal stories too, because that's something that we work a lot on at SAGE, making sure that the voices of our elders are kind of front and center and their stories are front and center. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of what you've learned in working with younger folks and older folks, and that from that intergenerational perspective. And maybe Brendon too, you kind of, because you mentioned a little bit of intergenerational work yourself at AARP, and kind of, because I think a lot of times younger folks feel like, they don't know how to build relationships with people who are older. They don't know where they are. And kind of on the other hand as well, older folks, experience a lot of ageism, and they don't feel welcome in a lot of, kind of common spaces. I wonder if you two could kind of talk about the work that you do intergenerationally and kind of the lessons and takeaways you've learned from kind of fostering those relationships.
Jeanne, do you want me to go, or do you want to go first? Okay. One of the things that we started to do was we've now partnered with an organization to try and get people to go to the polls as poll workers, have intergenerational pairs that go and work the polls together as a way to sort of become invested in the process, see how it works. And, I think that something that I always enjoy is anytime we get to have a conversation with, we have an internship program here at AARP, and anytime that, a new MSW intern comes into our organization, getting to sort of show them the behind the curtains look at things always sort of, in my experience, has stirred their passion for working in politics or with policy and advocating for the rights of discriminated communities and things like that. And I think that doing that working as a poll worker is another great way of doing that.
A lot of our programming ends up being kind of intergenerational. So I always think it's great when we had an event the other day where the youngest person was 16 and the oldest person was about 82. And it wasn't even that big of a group of people, and it was just really natural. Not all of these are really political events, but as the organization that we are, it all feeds into that. And I really do see that those moments are pretty special in terms of building those connections. I don't think anything happens because of individuals, and intergenerational connections are some of the most important for giving the kind of context we need.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you both for sharing. And I'm glad to the boost for becoming a poll worker. Sage did a lot of work in 2020 and this year as well, encouraging younger folks to sign up for poll workers, because as we know, we're still in a pandemic, unfortunately, and a lot of our our elders are still, they're very at risk for contracting COVID and having all of the side effects of that. So I think having younger folks who are, all boosted and vaccinated and ready to go, or who are maybe in a little bit of a safer position than someone who's older or immunocompromised living with HIV is really important. So I'm glad that you brought that up. So yeah, I wonder, I wonder if you could also, if you all could kind of talk about some maybe actions that you are working on to get folks out to the polls. Maybe you have voter registration drives, things like that. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of what you're working on in the next few weeks? As I mentioned earlier, the deadline to register to vote is on Monday, so it's coming up fast. I'll be sure to share the link to register to vote to make sure folks, if you kind of use the link that Darrell mentioned earlier to check your registration, you're like, oh wait, my registration is not up to date. You still have time to edit it. But I wonder if you all could talk about and share with kind of the audience kind of some opportunities that they could take, because I know a lot of people are kind of, they're ready, they want to go vote, especially for our elders. Like Brendon said, like older folks tend to be more higher propensity voters. They're going to vote a little bit more often. So a lot of people are looking to do more than just vote. So I wonder if you all could kind of talk about how your organizations are helping with that.
Well, for folks, if you want to get involved with the ACLU, I'll throw our link in the chat. But we are doing get out the vote efforts in communities, lower and impoverished communities, to make sure people are voting up and down the ballot, voting for every kind of a seat that's up for grabs. We're specifically focused on the Maricopa County Attorney's race and the Secretary of State's race, but we are looking for people to, come out and get involved in some community canvassing to make sure that, people are just aware of what's going on in our community, aware of these important races that are ahead of us, and know a little bit. It's a chance to make community with your neighbors and spend some time informing folks about these important races. So yeah, I'll throw that link into the chat, but we are still looking for volunteers. And I would just reiterate, there is a shortage of poll workers. So if folks want to be involved on election day, there's still time to sign up in Maricopa County, Pima County, and other places to be a poll or election worker. So I would encourage folks to do that as well.
We have a few different events coming up. We have some ongoing phone banks where we're sharing our voter guide with voters. Those are every Wednesday and Thursday evening. So we'd love to have people drop in and help out with those. I'm putting a link in the chat here. I think it only goes to the hosts and panelists, but putting that in the chat there for our events calendar. And that's a great way to sign up for those, but also for some of our other events. We have a fun kind of social hour planned for this Sunday, which is, this Sunday, which is just shortly before the voter registration deadline on the 11th. And that'll be a great opportunity, I think, to just kind of come together around some voter registration work. So yeah, that's kind of an overview. Lots on the calendar page in there, but those are some of the big highlights.
I'll add that we are doing some additional pushes on social media to get out the making sure that people are registered to vote by Monday. And if they'd like to request a mail-in ballot, that they do so by the deadline. We'll do a similar push when it comes to the day of the election and around that last week before the election starts. So that way, if you'd like to vote early, you can, and you've done it in time, as well as making sure that you get your ballot in with at least that 7 or 8 days before ahead of time, so that way you can guarantee that it makes it in time. I'll also add that, like I mentioned a little earlier, we've already got a video voter guide out on the governor's race. We're hoping to get 2 more out on the treasurer and the attorney general's race next week. Also next week, we're doing a couple of teletown halls with our members. We're still trying to finalize some details, but we're hoping to do the Secretary of State candidates next week, as well as the U.S. Senate candidates. So we're trying to get that information out there before early voting starts, because we know that people in Arizona like to vote by mail, or early vote.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. I wonder too, I just remember I meant to ask this earlier, but I think, Darrell, you mentioned that there's a ballot measure that's going to be on the ballot this year. And one of the things, because SAGE is also, as AARP and ACL you mentioned, we are also a completely nonpartisan organization. But one of the things that we are able to talk about is ballot measures. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the ballot measure that's going to be on our ballots this year, and what people should be prepared for and know a bit more about it.
Sure. So there are 3 ballot measures. Well, there are more than 3 ballot measures on the ballot this year, but 3 that the ACLU are particularly concerned about, and I think really impact this community in a kind of tangential way. Proposition 128, Proposition 129, and Proposition 132. Proposition 129 is what we call a single subject ballot initiative rule. It will require that any future ballot initiative is restrained to 1 single subject. Proposition 132 will require 60% or more of voters to approve any ballot initiative, any future ballot initiative that are led by the citizens. And Proposition 128 undermines the Voter Protection Act. It would make it easier for the legislature to overturn or change any kind of ballot initiative that is passed by citizen vote. And the reason these 3 initiatives are so important is because in Arizona, the ballot initiative process has been a great source of progressive change. Through the ballot initiative process, we were able to obtain higher minimum wage, legalized marijuana and medical marijuana, and some other kind of progressive wins. Looking forward, it's not unlikely that abortion rights or marital equality could be on a future ballot initiative. So it's important that we protect this process, protect this ability for voters as citizens to make and create new laws, because we know how difficult it is at the state legislative level. So we are encouraging everyone on Proposition 128, 129, and 132 to vote no. We are amongst a group of progressive organizations who are really concerned about the ways those propositions will limit democratic access in the future. So there's more information. I'll try to find our landing page and put it into the chat, but there's more information we have on those, and please check out the ACLU voter guide to get a little bit more information on each of those ballot initiatives, what they entail, and why we think voters should reject them.
And luckily, it's easy to remember to vote no on all of them. It's not like yes, yes, no. It's vote no on all of the ballot propositions, which means we're lucky this year. We don't have to keep track of all of them. But yeah, thank you so much for that overview. I want to pause and give a little bit of time to see if the audience has any questions. None have come in so far, which just means that you all have been very good panelists in answering potentially all potential questions. But I'm just going to give it a few more seconds, see if folks want to submit any. And then if not, we'll pivot back to you all.
If it's okay for me to add, so there's 10 statewide ballot measures. Some of those are from citizen initiatives, some of those are from the state legislature. And it is kind of a mixed bag in terms of things that are really positive and things that are really negative. So I wouldn't encourage people to just vote no on every ballot measure. It's one that's a Predatory Debt Collection Act. It prevents predatory debt collection around like medical debt. That's, I think, a really important one and affects the LGBT community. And there's another one that's in-state tuition, like for Dreamers and stuff like that. So definitely something to check out. And I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. I very much so appreciate that, Jeanne. Thank you. That there are many more that could be good. Okay, we're not really getting any questions, which, like I said, is because our panelists are so great and comprehensive with your answers. But I wanted to kind of pass it back to you all about kind of any specific resources. I'm thinking of things, helping folks change their ID if they need to change it ahead of Election Day, things like that. I can drop a few things in the chat. But if you know of any, I want to make sure that kind of all of the resources that you all are working on that perhaps you haven't been able to mention are going to be able to be highlighted here.
I'll go ahead and go first. I'd say one of the best resources out there is definitely one that Darrell has already talked about, which is the Clean Elections website. Their website is chock full of information that as it relates to voting and making sure that your registration is up to date. So, I mean, if there's only one message that people get out of this is that, it's to make sure that your voter registration is up to date, that you have all the information that you need, and that you're ready to vote however you'd like to vote. So that's all I'll add.
Yeah, I'll just add that, you have a right to vote. And if you are denied on Election Day, there's definitely steps you could take to protect your right. The first step is, like I said, is reaching out to the manager or the leader at that particular polling site and letting them know your issues. If you can't resolve that at that level, you're always entitled to a provisional ballot, and you should request one and vote in that way. And if you do vote with a provisional ballot, make sure to get directions from the poll workers on how to make sure that provisional ballot is counted on Election Day. So yeah, remember, you have a right to vote. Don't be intimidated. Don't be scared. Make sure that you exercise your right, and we are here to support you.
I'm going to preface this with the fact that since the voter registration deadline is so soon, if you're interested in updating your documents in a way, if you're trans and you're interested in changing your name and all of that, that could affect your ability to vote in the election. But just to preface that, you can totally reach out to us, Equality Arizona. You can go to the Southwest Center, and they have people who are also very knowledgeable about the document, name change process. And there's also some national resources around that I could point people to. So definitely a lot of options there.
Yeah, and as Darrell said earlier too, having, a different gender on your voter registration and on your ID does not impact your ability to vote. So even if it's not completely up to date, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have trouble voting. And as Brendon mentioned, and we've all mentioned a few times, provisional ballots are always an option to make sure that your vote gets passed. So yeah, I feel like that was a great kind of place to end from all of you, but I also want to give another just pause, see if there's kind of any more questions, and also kind of turn it back to our panel, see if you all have questions for each other. If you you're I'll leave it at that instead of rambling on.
Emma, I actually have a question for you. I was curious about what some of the issues that SAGE has been working on and that you all have been doing to do outreach to the community.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that we've been working on is we have kind of a network of partners that we work with around the country, LGBTQ plus centers, senior centers, your county department on aging, which is called, some folks might be familiar, for those who are familiar with aging services, something that's called an area agency on aging, which is kind of like your county department on aging, and individual aging providers that we work with through training on cultural competency. And what we have been working on is making sure that they have the resources that they need to reach out to their participants, so that kind of all of the resources that we've been talking about today, a little bit earlier, as Jeanne mentioned, since we're so close to the voter registration deadline, but what we worked on a few months ago was kind of putting together a specific list of resources that says, here's how to check your voter registration. Here's how to, update your documents to make sure that that's in line with your voter registration and also in line with your gender identity. Things like knowing your voting rights, the 866 our vote hotline that he mentioned, and as well as kind of all of those deadlines for registering to vote. So what we find is that a lot of older adults, not everybody's on Facebook, not everybody's on social media. A lot of folks get this information through things like libraries and senior centers and their local LGBTQ center. So let's say your local LGBTQ center has, a Rainbow Elders program, and they have a social group. What we've been working on is with all of our partners across the country, which is very many, to make sure that they kind of have a good sense of what they need to share. They know when deadlines are, because a lot of folks who are people like social workers and program managers for these things, they're not always as deep in the political work, since they're really working on those direct services. So making sure that they kind of have the resources, and because they have all of those direct services, they have a lot on their plate. So we kind of want to hopefully help and work kind of SAGE as the kind of gathering of all of that information and helping distribute that to folks. We also have kind of a monthly volunteer call. One thing that we found during the pandemic, as I said, like a lot of people are not super comfortable with technology. They're not on social media. The way that we work with folks is through like in-person social programming and senior centers and things like that. But one thing that we have found is that the pandemic in some ways has helped in that a lot of people are a lot more comfortable with Zoom. Especially one thing that we found specifically in New York with our trans social group is that a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier, trans elders are very disproportionately harassed on public transportation. So they're not always as likely as their LGB counterparts to travel to their senior center. or travel to their LGBTQ center because they're too afraid of, what's going to happen on public transportation. So in some ways, having access to Zoom and having that kind of training and support has been really helpful, because it means that there's a lot of people that wouldn't have come to us otherwise. So we have this monthly volunteer call where we kind of gather folks around the country, and it's a combination of a social gathering space as well as a kind of call to action space. So some folks are involved in their own, they have very local kind of advocacy efforts and advocacy groups, and they're activists in their own right, and they'll share, this is a campaign that I'm working on, in my neighborhood around, access to increased funding for like LGBTQ friendly housing or something like that. So it's also a space for them to share on that. So we've been talking a lot with those folks too about kind of what they've been thinking about coming up to the election, figuring out that intergenerational focus. I think there's definitely a lot of older folks who want to take action and they want to talk to younger folks. But because of kind of all the technology, they don't always know where to start. So we can either help with that. And then also conversely, I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I can't reach out to them because like they're not as comfortable with email and Zoom. But we're finding that, 3 years into the pandemic, a lot of people are comfortable. So it's a meeting people where they're at, whether that's going to be in person. And unfortunately, this event couldn't be in person. But a lot of it is kind of reaching out to those senior centers and having those conversations and organizing, informational flyers for them to put up, in libraries and senior centers and things like that. Do you all have anything else to add? Any parting words?
Go vote.
Great parting words. I definitely agree. Go vote. Well, I want to thank you. We can wrap up a little early on this Friday night, and hopefully you all can have 5 minutes of your time back. I want to thank our amazing panel for taking the time to chat with us today about voting this year. Thank you to AARP as well for their generous support that allowed us to make this happen. And to all of our attendees who joined us tonight and will be joining us in the future. I know that we will be, using all of the resources that were shared and all of the information that was, very graciously shared by all of you in order to make sure that folks, continually have access to this information. It's a lot more accessible to watch a video about someone telling you to vote rather than just looking at a block of text. So that's always very helpful. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I want to end on kind of the go vote mentality. I'm going to drop a link in the chat, which will lead you to our page of kind of a few of the resources that I mentioned. One of the things that we do a lot in our work is making sure that people have a plan to vote. They know when they're going to go vote. They know how they're going to go vote, and how writing that down and having a conversation with someone makes it all the more likely that you're going to do it. So feel free to fill out your form. We'll email you with kind of a reminder based on what you said, hey, you said you were going to go do early voting if your state allows it. Hey, you said you were going to vote on election day. And I'll also add that this information is kind of completely private and anonymized. So we're not going to use anything based on that. It just kind of gets put into the email, and Sage does not see and we won't share it with anybody. And then if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, we also have many of the resources that we mentioned. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to our attendees as well. I think LGBTQ elders are a group that really isn't always talked about, and they're not always acknowledged in our spaces. So I'm so glad to hear from all of you about kind of what you're doing to help our elders get to the polls. So glad to hear about intergenerational work that's happening in our communities. It always makes my heart so warm. So yeah, if you have any questions for Sage moving forward, please reach out to advocacy@sageusa.org. If you have questions for any of the panelists for following up, feel free to reach out to me. at advocacy@sageusa.org. And if you want to go back and watch the recording, we'll be posting it on social media as well. And as Brendon said, go vote. It is, not as hard as a lot of folks make it out to be. There are many things in our way, but we also want to make sure that it's as easy as possible. And we have the resources that we talked about it today. There are a lot of folks who try very hard to make sure that we're not going out there and voting. And we're here to make sure that you actually do have the resources and to counteract that. So I appreciate you all joining and sharing those resources.